So I wonder if you can see at all that it's started to, there we go, perfect. We have started to record. There we go. Okay, now I will share our PowerPoint for today. So, as I said, we'll begin with a poem, and the poem that I'm going to begin with is from the book that you can see on your screen, I Am the Seed That Grew the Tree. If you haven't come across this poetry collection before, it is such a beautiful poetry collection. I honestly can't recommend it enough. It's a poetry collection put together by the National Trust, and there are 365 poems in there, a poem for every day of the year. The poem that I'm going to share with you now is a poem for the 24th of January, and it's called Flying. It's written by J.M. Westrup. Flying. I saw the moon one windy night, flying so fast, all silvery white, over the sky like a toy balloon, loose from its string, a runaway moon. The frosty stars went racing past, chasing her on ever so fast. Then everyone said, it's the clouds that fly, and the stars and moon stand still in the sky. But I don't mind, I saw the moon sailing away like a toy balloon. So I wonder if you could just pop into the chat a word, a thought, a feeling, or a connection that poem had for you. And Sarah will be watching the chat, and I will look forward to having a look at that when our meeting finishes today. Thank you for doing that. And a big thank you and a really big welcome to everybody that's here. Thank you all for joining. It's so wonderful to share in an event with people who are so passionate about ensuring that quality book talk happens with the children that you work with. So my name is Charlotte Vickers, and I am a Year 2 teacher and the Reading for Pleasure lead at St Peter's. I run our Unlocking Excellence English Hub's Teachers Reading Group, and last year I was really fortunate to gain a place as a final panel judge for the UKLA Book Awards. Before I began teaching, I studied English literature at university and was fortunate that I was able to study lots of children's literature. It was this that reignited my love for children's literature and enabled me to see it from a different perspective. I feel really passionately that children's literature is for everyone. It simply includes children as opposed to it being exclusively for children. So because of my background, I came into teaching with a passion for children's literature and with what I considered at the time a good knowledge of children's literature. My knowledge of children's literature, and in particular current and recently published literature, has since vastly grown. And for the past 2 years, I've been on a journey to ensure that my classroom buzzes with book chat. And it's that journey that I'll be sharing with you today. So why focus on book talk? Well, as teachers, we know the power of talk as a tool for learning, and this is just as important in reading. As well as this, book talk is an essential feature of a Reading for Pleasure pedagogy, and a book that I can't recommend enough and that I'll be drawing on today because of how much it's influenced my practice is Tell Me by Aidan Chambers. Here's a quotation from the book that I think really reinforces the value of book talk. I'll just give you a moment to read that quotation.
Sorry, Charlotte, to interrupt. Couple of people are putting in the chat that they're having a problem hearing you, so I don't know if you can just turn your volume up a little bit.
Yes, of course. Has that made it easier for you to hear me? If not, I can take my headphones out. Am I a little bit louder now, Sarah?
Yeah, maybe take your headphones out. I can hear you fine, but I know that there's a couple of people that have popped in the chat that they're struggling, so.
No problem. Hopefully you can hear me more clearly now. I I put my headphones in just in case the doorbell went or anything like that, but hopefully you can hear me clearly. So this book is Tell Me by Aidan Chambers, and I'll be drawing on it a lot today because it's a book that has really influenced my practice. And you can see how much Aidan Chambers values talk in the classroom, in particular talking about books. So today we'll be discussing the importance of talk and social reading environments as part of a rich reading pedagogy and culture. And the wonderful Teresa Kremin and others led a research project called the Teachers as Readers Research Project, which revealed how vital it is that teachers are knowledgeable about children's literature. If we are knowledgeable about the literature that will tempt and engage the children that we work with, then we will be well equipped to share enriched talk about reading. The research project also found that when teachers know more about children's reading practices and experiences beyond school, they were more effective in nurturing reading for pleasure and building communities of readers. So here the Teachers as Readers research outlines the key elements needed to effectively develop children's reading for pleasure. And we can see that 2 of the 4 key elements of a rich reading for pleasure pedagogy focus on talk. So those social reading environments and informal book talk, inside text talk and recommendations. In addition to this rich reading for pleasure pedagogy, we must ensure that we are facilitating the opportunity for our children to engage in reciprocal and interactive reading communities. So when considering our reading for pleasure pedagogy, it's important that we separate informal book talk with formal book discussions, which may focus on phonics or comprehension. Informal book talk invites all children to share their thoughts and any connections the book has had for them. And by engaging in informal book talk regularly, we are giving the children the opportunity to notice that texts can be interpreted in different ways, and that's okay. It's important that we provide our children with the agency to like or dislike a book and to not be afraid to share any thoughts or feelings that they may have about different parts, illustrations, words. And I can't recommend exploring the Research Rich Pedagogies website enough. On there, you can read all about the TARS research, you can look at examples of practice, as well as finding useful documents. For example, there's a review your practice document, which is a great starting point because it enables you to identify your best individual next steps. And it can equally be used to monitor your progress if you'd like. And I know that I have sent those links to Sarah. So Sarah, if you could pop the Research Rich Pedagogies website link into the chat, as well as the Review Your Practice document link, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So how can we define reading for pleasure? Well, put simply, if children are choosing to read and are reading frequently, then they are reading for pleasure. And why is it important to embed a rich reading for pleasure pedagogy? Well, the research shows that there are huge cognitive benefits if you're a reader as a child, as well as huge social and emotional benefits. The Centre for Literacy and Primary Education research shows that being literate changes your life. If you are literate, if you're a literate child who reads for pleasure, then this has more impact on your life chances than any other factor. As well as this, reading for pleasure is critical if we're going to tackle social injustice. So it's vital that we don't leave reading for pleasure to chance. So Aidan Chambers, in his book Tell Me, suggests this model where the enabling adult is central to supporting 3 key elements: ensuring a wide and quality selection of books, providing time to read, as well as time for children to respond. So let's focus now on the response element of this model. When I first began to ensure that I dedicated time for book talk, some of the best advice that I was given was there isn't a right or wrong. No time spent talking about books will ever be wasted. Although, of course, the more knowledgeable we are about children's literature, the richer those conversations will be. So how can we nurture children who talk well about books? Well, Aidan Chambers offers this advice. So he says, the fact is we learn to talk well by doing it with people who already know how, just as we learn best to teach by working with an experienced teacher. And likewise, that children instinctively question, report, compare and judge. They do this all the time with all kinds of activities like football, or a memory I had drawn on from a Year 3 class that I worked with was the Voice Kids. They love to talk about that. So let's ensure that we are the enabling adults that nurture this to include books as well. And can children be critics? Well, of course they can. We can nurture children to become critics, even of the texts that are too linguistically complex. So, for example, by supporting children to read the pictures in a book. I will just share with you another quote from Aidan Chambers, who says that helping children engage in the drama of reading, helping them to become dramatists, the rewriter of the text, director, interpreter of the text, actor, performer of the text, audience, actively responsive participant of the text, and even critic, that commentator and expliciter and scholarly student of the text. So we are privileged in our roles when working with children, so let's use this to empower children to never be afraid to share what a book means to them, what connections it has to their life experience. By valuing all responses to a text, we are valuing our children, and we're showing them that there is no right or wrong. My own love of English is because of how open-ended it is. There isn't a right or wrong, and every response is valued. So we all know the power of building great relationships with the children that we work with at any age. And the children we work with will be affected by us as readers. So if we model talking about books, if we share our reading lives and journeys, this will directly affect their reading journey. Being an expert reading role model is more than just joining in with the children's book chat. It's about engaging in that book chat because we are readers ourselves. One tool that I've used and have found really useful for monitoring and documenting the impact of the Reading for Pleasure pedagogy that I've embedded in my classroom are these children's reading surveys. And if you were in Teresa's talk this morning, you'll know that she had mentioned those as well. So they're particularly useful when you're working with a new group of children to give you an initial understanding of how the children you're working with see themselves as readers. And again, they're from the Research Rich Pedagogy's website, among so many other useful resources. So whenever I work with a new group of children, I will give them these reading surveys and then I'll take them in. And then from the reading surveys, I draw up a table like this, split into children who can read and do, children who can read and don't, children who can't read and do, and children who can't read and don't. And that enables me to identify the children that I'm going to be informally focusing on during any of our book chat times. Those are the children that I really want to tempt in particular, those children who are not reading, they're choosing not to read. From this, we can then be able to monitor our impact. So I then love to continue to give out the reading surveys, perhaps once a term or once every other term, just to monitor whether some of those children that initially didn't choose to read are now choosing to read. If we're impacting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children a year, then we are having a huge, huge impact. So some of the other resources, and again, I know that Teresa mentioned some of these during her talk this morning, that are really fantastic from the Research Rich Pedagogy's website, are these. So for example, the question tiles for different age groups, a poster for supporting readers at home, and these are fantastic resources to send out to parents as well. So a lovely activity that enables you chance to get to know your children as readers is to set up a book blanket activity. So it's important when doing this that you know the books well and that this is not a one-off activity. This is something to do in addition to daily read aloud time with time to talk and regular opportunities for children to select texts independently. So I use guided reading time twice a week for children to enjoy quiet, independent reading. And during this time, children are allowed to talk to one another about books and to read together if they'd like, but they must be respectful of our guided reading group. So allowing children the opportunity to take books outside as well during playtimes and lunch times is another great opportunity for children's reading for pleasure. for them to chat with each other, as well as enabling adults. So as well as this, we enjoy what we call a class text, and to decide what our class text would be, I suggested 3 books, all that I had read, shared my enthusiasm with the children, and they voted for which we should read first. So the book chosen this year in September was The Great Dodo Comeback by Fiona Sandiford. And inspired by an example of practice on the Research Rich Pedagogy's website, I offered the children the options of sitting on the carpet or in their table space comfortably, perhaps with their head on the table if they'd like, as well as the option to use a blank piece of paper, pencils and colours to relax and draw what they're imagining as we read. The children loved this. As well as this, we have 2 main poetry books that we love. One of them is I Am the Seed That Grew the Tree, that I mentioned earlier, and another is I Bet I Can Make You Laugh, put together by Joshua Siegel. We read at least a poem a day. To be honest, we read more than a poem a day. The children are always recommending poems. And our sports coach reads these on PE day as well. And the children, as I said, are always recommending poems that they've enjoyed during independent reading time. And we love to share them together. So by ensuring that we make time for reading for pleasure, we can be sure to continue to engage and excite our children as readers. So, for example, I know that the children in my class love poems by James Carter. So I have purchased James Carter's just released poetry book, which is next to me actually, Weird, Wild and Wonderful, to share with them in our online classroom. I also follow James Carter on Twitter and may see whether he can join us on Teams one day soon. So introducing new books to children in exciting ways is important too. So this could be by leaving a book out and not saying anything until the children notice. In December, the children in my class believed that a busy elf had been visiting our classroom because a mysterious wrapped book was left for us to discover together on 3 occasions. And here's some pictures of the Reading for Pleasure in action in my class. And as Teresa said earlier, if you were in her talk, reading for pleasure is not one slot to have in the day. It is something that is woven through our practice. And when I talk about read aloud time daily, actually in my class, I aim to read aloud more than once a day. If I'm aiming to read aloud more than once a day, then I know that we will read aloud at least once. So for example, if there's a spare few minutes, that's when our poetry books are perfect because we're able to pick up a poetry book and share a recommendation. So in these pictures on the top left, you can see 3 boys being critics. They had noticed that the illustration in the book Little Lumpty by Micah Amai had starkly changed, and they were debating why. It had changed because it was a flashback to Humpty Dumpty's fall. That's what one of the young boys was suggesting, and the others disagreed, and that was when I went over and wondered with them why had the illustration changed. It was that flashback to Humpty Dumpty's fall. When I first read with the young boy on the left at the bottom in September, his first words were, "I haven't read for a really long time," and now he's choosing to read at playtimes. Similarly, the young boy on the right, excuse the chaos of golden time, and I was trying to sneakily take a photo of him because I didn't want him to know that I was doing it or feel conscious, but he is one of my lower ability readers and couldn't resist reading when he could have been building, drawing or playing a game. So I'm really proud to have created a rich reading environment which immerses the children in my class and offers them frequent access to high quality texts. So when determining which texts to have in our classroom, as well as ensuring that we have a range of fiction, non-fiction poetry, magazines and comics, we must also make sure that we are being critically selective. So the CLPE have published their Reflecting Realities report for the past 3 years now, and this research looks at the representation of Black, Asian and minority ethnicities in children's literature. Here are the key findings from 2019, which were published in 2020. So we can see those key findings at the top here, where we are now, the percentage of that representation in children's literature is going up. However, given that on average classrooms have a percentage of around 33% Black, Asian and minority ethnicities, there is still a lot of work to be done to ensure that all ethnicities are justly represented. And even with the progress that's been made, there are still flaws in that some books which feature BAME characters do not fairly represent them, and so they can be counterproductive. If you haven't read it before, I really recommend reading the report. And again, Sarah has the link for the report. So Sarah, if you could post that in the chat, that would be fantastic. And just some quotes from that report as well, which I'm sure you'll agree are really powerful. Literature helps us to dream differently. It can inspire ambition, plant seeds of hope, and of course, educate us. And when we come together to acknowledge and celebrate our differences, we also discover our human similarities. Through this, we become stronger and more reflective. It goes without saying that the more widely we read, the more experiences we'll have, the more understanding we'll have about different people in different parts of the world. So now on to some recommendations from me, which I believe are high quality and completely fit with being critically selective. And I have focused my recommendations on books that fairly represent Black, Asian, minority ethnic characters. But first, you choose. If you haven't come across this series of books by Nick Sharratt and Pippa Goodhart, oh my goodness, they are amazing for encouraging children, very young children, in an early years classroom or Key Stage 1 classrooms. I believe that every early years and Key Stage 1 classroom should have at least one of these books, if not the whole series. I've snipped just some of the inside pages so that you can see in these books, the children get to create their own stories based on all of the suggestions that are inside. So they just beg to be read with friends, they beg to be talked about, so they really are fantastic for that kind of starting off high quality book talk right from a really early age. And then on to some other recommendations from me. So My Pet Star is another book that's perfect for an early years or Key Stage 1 classroom. In this book, the character is not defined by her ethnicity. You'll see Solway. Solway is a beautiful book that tackles the issue of colorism. Counting on Catherine was the winner of the non-fiction category of the UKLA Book Awards in 2020, with the book that I shared at the very beginning, Child of St Kilda, coming closely behind, highly commended. But Counting on Catherine, as well as Race to the Frozen North, are biographical, creative, non-fiction texts which share the struggles that both Catherine Johnson and Matthew Henson faced because of the colour of their skin. The 11th Trade won the UKLA Book Awards 2020 in the 7 to 11 age group, and it's a beautifully sensitive text that tackles the issue of refugees. The protagonist is a 12-year-old boy called Sammy who's moved to Boston with his grandfather. And the text throughout focuses on the significance of his grandfather's rehab, so a musical instrument which represents home for them. Then Toad Attack is a fun and accessible early chapter book which features a character with a hearing aid. It's also published by Barrington Stoke, and if you aren't familiar with the publisher Barrington Stoke, it's a really fantastic publisher for accessible books, particularly for children with dyslexia. The way that the books are printed is really, really accessible, so I highly recommend Barrington Stoke publishers as really accessible texts. And The Space We're In offers a window into a family who have a child with autism. It's told from the perspective of 10-year-old Frank as he navigates his relationship with his autistic younger brother. So although The Space We're In doesn't feature BAME characters, I had to include it because we must consider how we are supporting inclusivity when we're selecting texts. Then you'll see Look Up and Clean Up, which are two really uplifting picture books where the characters are authentically depicted, relatable individuals who are living real and everyday lives. Now I'd love to share a story with you to finish our session this afternoon, and the story that I'd like to share with you is Bloom by Anne Booth. And illustrated by Robin Wilson-Owen, and the publisher is Tiny Owl. There was once a beautiful flower which grew under the window of a big house, and a little girl who loved it. Every morning, on her way to school with her brother, the little girl would visit the flower. She would look at its beautiful petals, drink in its sweet smell, and wonder at the smoothness of its leaves and at their colour and shape. "Good morning, beautiful flower," she would say. "I think you're wonderful. Thank you for being here for us. I love you." And she would go to school happy. One morning, the man living in the big house woke up early and heard someone talking to his flower. He looked out of his window and saw the little girl. "How dare you talk to my flower?" he shouted. "Go away and never come near my flower again." The little girl and her brother didn't like being shouted at, so they went to school another way. The next day, when the sun rose, the flower did not open, and every day after it stayed tight shut. The man was furious and sent for his gardener. "What is the matter with my flower?" he demanded. "Is it getting enough water?" "Yes," said the gardener. "I water it every morning and evening." "Well, you're obviously not doing it properly," said the man crossly. "I can see I'm just going to have to do it myself." And so every morning he got up and watered the flower, and every evening before he went to bed, he watered the flower. But it still refused to open. "Maybe it needs more shade," said the man. "The sun is very hot in the middle of the day." "I have made sure it has plenty of shade," said the gardener. But the man said, "Well, you're obviously not doing it properly. I can see I'm just going to have to do it myself." So every day, when the sun was at its highest, he took his umbrella and shaded the flower from the heat. But it still didn't open. He watered the flower in the morning and shaded it from the midday sun, and watered it again just before he went to bed. The man began to talk to it. He told it how wonderful he was, how lucky it was to be his flower, and how important his job was. But it still didn't open. He told it all about his problems, how busy he was, and the fact that nobody liked him. He complained about how his gardener was rubbish, how if he didn't do everything, nothing got done properly, and how lonely he felt. He ordered it to bloom for him to cheer him up. The unhappy man called the gardener to him again. "Before you say anything," said the gardener, "I don't know what the matter is. All I know is that the flower hasn't opened since you sent away the little girl who passed by it every morning." "What did she do that I don't do?" said the man crossly. "Well, she used to talk to it every day," said the gardener. "That can't be it," said the man. I talk to it every morning, at midday, and before I go to bed, and what I can say must be much better than anything a little girl could say. The man thought and thought. I can see I am just going to have to ask that child to come back. Maybe she has some magic words which make the flower bloom. So he went to the school gate and waited for the little girl and her brother to arrive. My flower stopped blooming after you left, said the man to the little girl. Poor flower, said the little girl. I've watered it and sheltered it and talked to it every day, but it still won't open. And a tear rolled down his cheek. What do you say to it? Said the little girl. And her brother passed the man a hanky. Well, said the man, blowing his nose, I tell it how important I am and how lucky it is to be in my garden. I tell it how miserable I am. I tell it how horrible everybody else is, and I order it to bloom to cheer me up, but it doesn't work. Well, said the little girl, why don't you tell it how wonderful it is? Thank it for being there and how much you love it. That's what I always did. So the man ran home to his flower and said, You are wonderful. And as he said the words, he realised for the first time how truly wonderful the flower was. I'm so lucky you grow in my garden, he said. And as he said it, he realised how truly lucky he was, and how he hadn't ever really looked at his flower properly, and how he longed to see it and smell its perfume again. I love you so much, said the man at last, and as he said it, his own heart filled with love. And the flower bloomed. Now, I think that Bloom has a really, really powerful message, and one that's really important for us all to remember. I wonder whether you might like to post something in the chat, a thought, a feeling, a connection that Bloom has had for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point because that's the end of my talk, but thank you so much for coming along and thank you for listening. It's been such a pleasure to be invited to share some of my practice with you and to talk with you this afternoon.
Can I just say a massive thank you? That was amazing. It was really good to listen to sort of the follow on from Therese this morning and about how you've put all of those things into practice and how it makes such a positive difference in the classroom. So thank you ever so much. And I just think one of the things I took from it, which I know probably loads of you out there have the same thought, and you just think, how do I make time? I need to read more child's fiction. And I need to find out about those authors that are out there, you know, and it's not the celebrity authors, as Therese was talking about earlier. I need to find out about those authors that I don't know. And I think, you know, for all schools to have some sort of CPD, to have some sort of time, staff meeting time, whatever, where they just say to their staff, yeah, go and pick some kids' books, read them, get to know the authors, would make such a difference in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And when reading children's fiction at home, it's something I don't feel guilty for, because I know, you know, if I've got other jobs to do on my to-do list to do with work, if I'm choosing to read a children's book, then I know that that's going to really positively influence my practice. So yeah, I completely agree.
Absolutely, and you're working when you do it, you know, but it's one of those lovely work things that you really don't mind doing.
Absolutely, yeah, something that you truly enjoy. And yeah, as I said at the start, children's fiction, it really isn't exclusively for children. You know, it is really enjoyable to enjoy children's fiction as an adult. And, you know, I do get really excited about new books that are coming out. And yeah, it's really lovely to share that excitement with the children that I work with.
Fabulous. Has anyone got any questions for Charlotte? There's quite a few little thank yous and things coming up in the chat. there's not that many of us, so if you want to ask a question, you can either type in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, you're really welcome to.
And people are saying that they love the poem a day. I think that was amazing. The fact that because you're right, poetry, because poems are quite short, you can share loads of poems in just the odd minutes during the course of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a lovely way to start the day as well sometimes, and well, equally to finish the day or just before lunchtime. So yeah, we do love our poetry.
Oh, brilliant. Well, just before we leave the session, I've got to remember to do this. I'm going to announce the winner of this session's prize book draw. Drum roll. And the winner of the draw this session was Rachel Hitchman. So well done, Rachel. If you'd like to just type your contact details where you'd like the book sent in the chat function, then we'll make sure we get that sent over to you. Fab. Okay, so if nobody's got any other questions, then obviously you know how to sign into your next session, which is on at 2:45.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, and thank you once again, Charlotte.
You're very welcome. I'm not being given the option to stop recording, so I'm hoping that that's all in hand.
Yeah, I assume it'll just stop when we stop. And Janine will have.
Yeah, for some reason it's giving me the option to start recording again, so I'm not quite sure.
I've got.
There you go. Contact details for our winner.
Charlotte, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, thank you for that. That was so interesting.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you, do you have any tips on the best way to organise your books in your book corner?
I do organise my books, so I group them into non-fiction and fiction, but I try to group them by kind of rhythmic or sort of lyrical picture books, and then picture books that perhaps aren't rhyming picture books. So I group them in that sort of way, and then similarly when I have done the book blanket activity, I've had a table of kind of rhythmic picture books and then another table of picture books and non-fiction books, but then I equally include chapter books that we've read as class texts that perhaps are beyond some or most of the children's reading ability, but that they may wish to go and talk about with their friends because we've read them together.
Brilliant.
You're welcome.
Fabulous, there we go. Well done, Charlotte.
Sarah. Yeah, who do you have the joy of watching this afternoon?
So I've got Maria Richards from Talk for Writing this afternoon, so she's going to be talking about reading spines.
Fantastic. I'm so glad that they're all being recorded because it's so hard to choose, but I'm going to Joseph Coelho's talk this afternoon because I love Joseph Coelho. He's got so many brilliant books. But
fabulous. Well, cool. Thank you ever so much. Go and get yourself a cup of tea or something now before we go into the next one.
I will do, yes. Thank you.
All right, take care.